and welcome to Unplugged with Nick Ponter and Britt. Today we're going to talk about a very interesting subject, small talk. Now, it might sound rather small, but we can guarantee you it's not. More to that in a minute. But before we get going, a little bit about myself first, before I ask Britt to introduce herself. My name is Nick Ponter. I work at PS Sprachenservice. We are a language school mainly working with German businesses, and our main beliefs are taking away the fear of communicating in a language, giving people enough vocabulary to do their jobs, and basically no fear. I'm also a published author of Connor Jackson and The Memory Thieves. Enough about me. My elevator pitch is done. Britt, over to you.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Britt Breu, and I am a freelance corporate trainer in the Rhine-Main area in central Germany. And I work also with small to medium sized enterprises, and I help people speak with more confidence and self-assurance in English.
Sounds like we pretty much do exactly the same thing. I forgot to say, I'm from Bielefeld. Apparently it doesn't exist, but it does.
Great. Okay, Nick, so on Unplugged, we talk about specific topics in English, but in communication. And our topic today is making small talk big talk. The problem with the expression small talk is that it really it sounds like meaningless chit chat. What's your opinion on the subject?
I completely agree. The term sounds rather unimportant in a way, small talk. But I believe the opposite is exactly the case. Big talk is the way we like to call it here today, is much more suitable, I think, to describe what we will now go through and give tips about. Let's turn small talk into big talk, Britt.
Okay, well, I completely agree with you. I mean, just the expression small talk really minimizes what an important role it plays in interpersonal communication. I mean, small talk sounds like just talking about weather or sports or things that really don't matter. And in doing so, it makes small talk seem unimportant and like it doesn't really matter. I mean, the whole name is completely counterproductive and implies a kind of an incorrect mindset towards it. What do you think?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the weather. Well, the Brits, we love to talk about the weather, and that is small talk, but it can be okay. It's okay for an icebreaker. I mean, let's take, for example, you're in a meeting and you just want to have some little chit chat just to warm up, then it's absolutely fine to talk about, how's the weather? Did you have a good journey? Because that's not the purpose in that context of going deeper. That's what I believe.
Right, right. Well, nearly almost all the people I train say that small talk is the most important, but yet the most difficult part of communicating in English. Most of them really dislike it because they feel uncomfortable. But I find usually it's because they don't have much training or any techniques on how to do it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I hear exactly the same things from my students and customers. But it's still, we're still calling it small talk. I mean, it's okay. I mean, everyone can talk about the weather or how was your journey, where are you staying, and but we need to define it now. Let's call it big talk, Brit. And why? Because it is big and it is important, and that's why we're here today to discuss it. Um, but to go into some more detail, but how would you define big talk? But just for the viewers, we can carry on calling it small talk for ease of purpose.
Right, for ease of purpose. Okay, well, small talk, or rather big talk, if it's done properly, really is an essential communication skill. And it's so important for establishing a connection with your conversation partner, whether you know them or you're just meeting them for the first time. It really is an opportunity to build a rapport and find commonalities between you and the other person. Why do you think small talk is so difficult for people?
It's a very good question. I believe that they're unsure what to talk about, exactly what, and then missing vocabulary if you want to go into deeper subjects, more complicated subjects. Um, there are a lot of opinions out there about what people should or shouldn't talk about. Some people say don't talk about politics or sport and this and that, because it's potentially dangerous. I disagree with this advice, to be perfectly honest. I don't think you can shackle people down to say what you can or can't talk about. Do you agree with my thoughts on that, Britt?
I do. I do. I don't really think there are any cut and dry black and white rules about small talk. It really depends on who you're speaking to, and I think it's up to every person to use their common sense. In each culture, there are acceptable things that you can use for small talk conversation. It really depends on the situation and the person.
Now, as part of our Unplugged program, we like to offer tips. And here we go. We're going to go straight into the first tip of today, Britt. So, which topics can people safely talk about?
Well, pretty much anything goes. I mean, common topics are like travel, hobbies, family, job, your hometown or your home country, what's what's on Netflix, what's going on in the sports world, maybe even the meeting or conference venue or the food that's there, commuting. There's so much to talk about. I say if you know that you're going to be traveling or working with somebody from a different country, it's really, really important to be aware of, what's happening in that country, if there are any public holidays or any cultural celebrations that are taking place at the moment. That's really, really important. Do a little bit of research on those things. And we also talked a little bit about news and sports. And some people advise to avoid these topics because they could be controversial or sensitive, perhaps even a little dangerous. What advice do you have on that?
I disagree with the advice which people give. Obviously, there's no clear answer on this. And talking about the news, of course, can be, potentially controversial, but it depends how you do it. That's the main thing. I don't think anyone would really ask a direct question about, hey, what do you think about the conflict in the Middle East? Or who will you be voting for in the next presidential election? I mean, to be honest, that's really asking for trouble and not very good communication skills. And for this, you do need good communication skills, and in particular, good English skills on how to approach the subject differently. Let's say you work in the field of logistics. A question like, has the trouble in the Red Sea delayed any shipments? What's happening at the moment? I mean, this is definitely not small talk. We're in the realms of big talk here. And
Right.
just a little story, one of my friends is a salesperson. He has his favorite football team on his folder, which he takes to customers, and he shows it to them as an icebreaker. So he said, oh, you support this team. So I can't go along with this, don't talk about politics or sports. I think you can.
Right, right. That sounds like really common sense, like a common sense approach. And that's exactly our advice. You really have to read the situation and your conversational partner, be sensitive to that, and base your topics around that.
What do you mean by this exactly?
Well, I think you have to use your people skills here and really, if you notice some discomfort in the other person, then you can change or pivot the conversation topic and ask a question about something else.
Yeah, good advice.
That takes us to our second tip, Nick. What advice can you give us about finding subjects to talk about?
I think the easiest thing to do is keeping up to speed about what's in the news, global events. Um, Me personally, I read the news more than once a day. I use my smartphone, and I don't do it because of my job. I do it because I'm naturally interested in it, and because I've lived in different parts of the world. I naturally want to know more about what's happening in the world. So I read a good mixture of current affairs, science, the environment, technology, sport. And it's good because it means when I'm in a lesson or I'm really doing small or big talk with people, then I'm generally quite well up to speed with what's going on. And for example, AI, self-driving cars, these are all really good subjects which you can read lots about in the news all the time. And these are perfect subjects to get into conversations with people about.
Yeah, that's great advice, Nick, on keeping up to speed with current events and technology and science. It's also really, really good for vocabulary learning. Um, those certainly do make big talk a lot easier. And it's also really, really important to show interest in the other person and what they do every day in their business.
Yeah, completely. And I'm just going to pick up on one point you mentioned there as well, vocabulary. We discussed at the start of our show today that people are missing vocabulary, and really, it's I completely agree with you. Reading the news ups your vocabulary, certainly by getting yourself interested in as many and diverse subjects as possible. And then small talk or big talk is really about you and the person you're interacting with. And you've got to be interested in that person. I mean, for sure. And then the conversation will take its own course. One of the most important things, which I mean, I do it whilst I'm training, and I do it personally, is I ask lots of questions. I'm famous for it in lessons. I bombard people with questions and then follow on questions. I would never accept in a lesson. I said, "Hey, what did you do at work yesterday?" "Oh, I dealt with a problem with the shipment," and I'm there. Yeah, come on, hop, hop. I want more, and then I start. Exactly what? Where was the shipment going from? Where was it going to? Even though I do that in a lesson, it's exactly the same principle when you're having a conversation with somebody, and that's all to do with showing interest.
That's right. That's right, Nick. You took the words right out of my mouth. Questions, follow on questions. And I think we as English trainers, um, because it is our job to get people to speak more and grow their confidence while speaking, the only way to do that is to get them to speak. So that is really the bread and butter of our job, is getting people to elaborate and asking follow-up questions. And really, I mean, it's the Pareto rule in communication. Asking 20% of the questions will give you 80% of the conversation. It's really brilliant how that applies to every area of life. So the key to making big talk out of small talk is by asking questions. And that brings us to our final tip for today: two different kinds of questions, or types of questions you can use when you are doing small talk or big talk with other people. There are two types I focus on. Maybe we can look at those two together. I like to focus on question tags and open-ended questions for follow-on questions. Okay, Nick, so let's start with question tags first. What exactly are question tags, and how do we use them in small talk?
Yeah, we should definitely use them in small talk. So, what are question tags? It's a very good technique, a communication technique of getting somebody you're talking to agree to something or to confirm. They're good icebreakers or door openers, and certainly good with people maybe you don't know so well. If you want to prompt them into saying something, a question tag is what we use in language to do it. Let's have a look. For example, you have a statement with a question tag at the end. So shall we demonstrate, Britt, what exactly we mean by question tags?
Yes, let's do that.
For example, let's say we're rubbing shoulders at a coffee break or at a conference, at a vendor's booth, or at a trade fair. And I would say something like, "This conference center is really impressive, isn't it?"
Yes, it is.
And there we go. The "isn't it" is the question tag. So I'm prompting a reaction from Britt. And the key thing with question tags is that if you start with a positive statement, for example, "This conference center is really impressive," then you end with a negative question tag, "Isn't it?" This draws a positive response from the person you're speaking to, your conversation partner, and vice versa. So if I start with a negative statement, for example, "The weather was bad yesterday," the question tag is positive. For example, "Wasn't it?"
It was.
Another one, "They spared no expense on this setup, did they?"
No, they didn't. Yeah, but what happens if the person doesn't agree with you?
Well, that takes us to an open-ended and follow-on questions, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. What a wonderful question tag, Nick.
Thank you. So come on then, Britt, let's tell our secrets to everybody. What are open-ended questions? And why are they so important in making meaningful small talk?
Well, open-ended questions get the other person talking, which is like the magic ingredient to any small talk situation, because it means you don't actually have to do the talking. Open-ended questions are questions that start with question words, with who, what, why, when, how. So shall we show the audience what we mean?
Let's do it.
Okay, so if I ask you a closed question, which is a question that can be answered with either yes or no, it means that my conversation partner doesn't have to elaborate. So, for example, if I ask you, Nick, have you ever lived in any other countries?
Yes. Bit of a showstopper, isn't it?
It is. It is. It is. Because you're asking the question with the expectation that the person is going to open up and start talking. But a closed question doesn't invite them to do that. So let's just contrast that by using an open-ended question and then asking more open-ended follow-up questions, because this keeps a conversation going and it avoids any awkward silences like we just had, right? Okay, so same question, but posed as an open-ended question. Nick, which countries have you lived in?
Well, I've lived in, in quite a few different places, but to note, I would say I lived in Bangladesh for 2 years and Pakistan for 4 years. And I'm sure you would certainly want to ask me more questions about that.
Wow, well, that sounds really, really interesting. What was it like living in Bangladesh?
Bangladesh it was very challenging because it's obviously it's a very poor country, but it was also a very lovely country, lovely people, and it was my first real experience out of, say, a Western European environment. So to live in a country like Bangladesh was really being thrown in at the cultural deep end. But it was very rewarding and so interesting to see the country, get to know the people, different cultures. So yeah, it was a very interesting experience, Britt.
Wow, that sounds very, very interesting. And was Pakistan similar or was it different? What were your experiences there?
Um, in some respects similar, but also there were a lot of differences as well. I mean, I wouldn't like to put everybody into one pot. It's like saying everybody in Europe are the same or everyone in America is the same. And of course, in this part of the world, Bangladesh is quite different to Pakistan. There, of course, are similarities. They were one country at one stage. But Pakistan I was there for a longer period of time and I did a lot more there. And I would say my understanding of the country was a lot deeper because I was there for 4 years.
Right. Fascinating. Fascinating. I could keep asking you questions on and on about this subject, but since we are here for our audience, let's take the advice that we gave today and summarize it, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay, Nick. So in summary, all of our tips for today. So number one is really about your approach to small talk. So we advise our audience to see small talk really as an opportunity to build connection and rapport with the other person, right?
And to do that, I'll reiterate the advice: read, watch, listen to the world news, at least the headline, so you know what's going on. And through that, you will learn vocabulary and have at least some topics to talk about.
Right, right. And also, we emphasize the fact that you should use common sense when you're talking to another person. Really, any subject is open for small talk, but do use common sense and sensitivity when you're speaking to someone.
Exactly. And some language advice: use question tags and some open-ended and follow-on questions to show interest and keep the conversation going.
Great.
And after all these tips we've given you today about small talk and big talk and what to do, we've put together a little cheat sheet to summarize our tips and to give you some examples of how to turn small talk into meaningful big talk. You can find the link in the description where you're watching now. And now, Britt, over to you for the finish.
Yeah, it's been really great. Thanks, Nick. We're also going to be presenting a few more talks this year on essential communication skills in English, on topics like using artificial intelligence and language learning, more ways on how to build confidence while you're speaking English. Just stay tuned. We'll be announcing these on social media. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. You'll also find our emails addresses in the description box, as well as links to our social media platforms. I am on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And you, Nick?
Exactly the same with me. I use those 4 channels as well.
Great.
And this was Unplugged with Britt Breu and Nick Ponter, and we look forward to seeing you again. Until then, goodbye.
Bye-bye.